It's important we look at the facts. Why?
Douglas Ross is sounding pretty scared.
I believe in independence. And he clapped like a seal.
Hello, I'm Paul Hutcheon and welcome to another episode of Planet Holyrood, the Daily Record's weekly take on the big stories in Scottish politics. Joining me this week are two esteemed colleagues, Hannah Rodger, who's the chief reporter at the Sunday Mail, and Ben Borland, who's the editor of the Scottish Daily Express. So school's back, and by that I mean the summer recess is over and Holyrood is sitting again. And of course the main item of Holyrood business this week was Humza Yousaf's first programme for government in the job, effectively his version of the King's Speech. And in terms of themes, he said that it would be an anti-poverty programme for government. He would prioritise business as well. We saw initiatives on things like childcare, increasing benefit payments for pregnant women, a vague commitment to dual the A9 and other bits and pieces. So, Hannah, let's start with you. Was this the big, bold reset that Humza Yousaf needed, or was it an underwhelming hodgepodge of re-announcements and reheats?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely go with the latter there, especially around the A9, around free school meals. To be perfectly honest, we've heard it all before. And, I think it's a bit embarrassing actually for Humza to have to recommit to something that his predecessor had committed to and failed to deliver on. I think it's not that. If I was him, that's not something that I'd be bragging about, to be perfectly honest. And also, I think the issue with some of these policies is that there's no, there's not really any concrete timescales or real detail as to how these things are going to be delivered. I mean, I know with the free school meals, we've got a date of now 2026, I believe. But that was supposed to be 2022. And it just feels a little bit like it's being kind of pushed down the line, I suppose. And who's to say if, the SNP are still going to be in government by 2026? Yeah. So
yeah, no, that's the right time scale. Yeah.
I think some of the announcements are positive, like around childcare, like around the kind of social care workers' wages and things. But again, it makes me slightly concerned because, of course, we know that if you fling a whole load of money in one area, where is that money being taken from? And I guess that's our job to kind of figure that out. But I'd say that's my take on it.
Yeah, Hannah, sticking with you, I mean, I suppose the point I would make is that he said that cutting child poverty levels is his top priority. That costs money because to take people out of poverty, you have to give them more cash, higher benefits, topping up the wages, that sort of thing. And if you look at what his deputy said earlier this year, they're facing a £1 billion black hole. So there isn't any extra money. So they're facing this sort of tension between wanting to do something which is expensive and not having anything to really back it up. Do you think that he might struggle to actually live up to his top priority?
Well, absolutely. And it's also, looking at Nicola Sturgeon and that sort of doomed phrase that she said, "Judge me on my record for education." And, we can't say that there's been a huge success in Scottish education and it's drastically improved during her time as First Minister. And I kind of worry that Humza has made the same mistake because poverty is, yes, there are indicators, but there's so many sort of intangible elements around it that it's quite hard to measure everything. And as you say, there's no money. Everybody is skint, and that includes councils and the government. and I don't see how they can afford. I think it's excellent what their aspirations are, but I just don't see how they're going to make that work with the budgetary constraints that they've got. And also, let's be honest, a lot of these schemes that the Scottish Government announce, they give the sort of power or the funding or whatever to local authorities to sort of enact. And then when it goes wrong or it doesn't work properly, they blame local councils. So, I kind of see a bit of that already. I predict some of that to be happening.
Yeah, I think the great unravelling, watch this space. Ben, what's your perspective on the programme for government from a sort of centre-right Daily Express perspective?
I think the number one thing for me, we're talking about the black hole and where's the money coming from. Clearly the money's going to come by clobbering middle-class Scots with further tax rises. I mean, it's so predictable, it's so depressing. I was just thinking there as you were speaking, I don't think anyone in newspapers is earning a king's ransom, but we're all quite senior people in the industry. I certainly pay more in tax in Scotland than I would if I lived in England and did the exact same job. What's to stop me buying a house in the Lake District? As you can see, I'm at home in the spare room. I could work from home. I could jump on a train to Glasgow 2 or 3 times a week. I could be in Edinburgh in an hour and a half, and I'd probably come out ahead. And, there was a report this week saying that people are doing this. And Humza Yousaf's response was, I don't care. If they don't want to live here and contribute to our great social experiment, then let them go and pay their tax in England. It's just such a wrong-headed approach. And
well, I mean, let's say you did buy this property in the Lake District, you're probably going to have to pay stamp duty on it, legal fees. There's probably going to be higher council tax in that part of the world.
Do you think Cumbria County Council will be higher than East Dunbartonshire? I'm not sure. Wouldn't be massive. I mean, I know
are these suburbs all kind of protected? Is that not why they were created in the first place?
There was a story in the papers over the summer that Band E houses in the south of England were paying similar council tax to Band E houses in Scotland. And they were talking mansions. We're talking Sussex.
Would it really be in your financial interests to leave your family home and move to Cumbria with all the sort of hassle of uprooting?
Set up a new family home. It's starting to look that way. It just feels like we're being persecuted and pursued and asked to pay.
Persecuted?
Financially persecuted for the pleasure of living in the SNP Scotland.
Right, firstly, you are paying extra income tax as a result of decisions that the SNP made, but you're also paying higher national insurance as a result of decisions the Conservatives have made. Why not talk about that?
Well, that's the same for everyone in the UK. This is the iniquity of people in the same country. So let's not forget, the UK is the country. Scotland isn't the country. England isn't the country. The United Kingdom is the country that we live in.
Well, Scotland is a country.
Scotland is a country, Ben. That's why we've got a devolved parliament. We're not.
No, but the state, the state. Well, England's a country. Scotland's a country historically, but the state is the United Kingdom.
We are a country. I mean, Cumbria.
I take the point. But the United Kingdom, in the same way as Australia or Germany, is the country that we live in, and why should people in one part of that country pay more than people doing the exact same job in another part?
Income tax was devolved to the Scottish Parliament. That was a democratic decision. And it's within the competence to either raise it, cut it, or keep it at current levels.
Yeah, and it is. And it's within people's rights to then say, well, I don't want to pay this. I'm going to move. And the response to that is good riddance.
Scotland as a country seems like quite a bizarre thing to say.
I didn't deny that Scotland was a country. I said the United Kingdom is the nation state.
Yeah, it is the nation state, yes, but there are countries within that make up the UK, and as we know, Scotland's self-determined to stay in the United Kingdom back in 2014, but it's still a country, and we're a devolved parliament. We have income tax under our control, and our politicians make those decisions. You know, if you don't want them to have those decisions, then call for the abolition of the Scottish Parliament, but I don't think the Express is doing that.
The Express isn't doing that. What the Express is doing is saying that everyone in the United Kingdom should pay the same level of income tax.
Well, I mean, on that basis, we just have exactly the same NHS, exactly the same education. What is the point of having evolution?
Do you know what? I just think, right, people listening to Planet Holyrood really don't care about this. I think we should get back to talking about Programme for Government and all the other exciting things that are happening in Scottish politics this week.
My last point on tax, okay? Do you not
really
think...
No, I think we should just move on.
Hold on, just one final thing. Do you not think, was he not hinting at a U-turn on income tax rises? Because at the briefing yesterday, he was talking about behavioural change and looking at the impact of maybe people moving south of the border. So do you not detect that even though...
well, I hope so.
Hinting's no good. He's hinted at a single-use vape thing. He's hinted at the A9 duelling. He's hinted at all these things. I mean, stop bloody hinting and go on with it. Just declare what you're going to do.
Absolutely. Just on the A9. I mean, this is such an old promise.
Yeah, I know. How long is it now? About, 15 years?
I was certainly... I remember 2007, after the SNP got in, going on a road trip with Murdo Fraser and Neil Gregg from the AA, which was a fascinating.
That sounds amazing.
We drove from Perth to where is it?
Inverness, no?
No, not all the way to Inverness. The Harrods of the North, the posh service station where you can get.
Oh, House of Brewer.
House of Brewer. We drove from Perth to House of Brewer. Anyway, beside the point. The point is that this was a very, very, very long time ago that the SNP first promised to duel the A9. And the fact that Humza Yousaf is re-promising it yet again in his programme for government 16 years after Alex Salmond was elected specifically on a promise to do this, we still don't have an end date.
I mean, I think that was my point.
2026, but the whole project could be years beyond that.
That's my point about it just being a bit embarrassing now. You know, how can you put these things in your programme for government that your government have been promising for years and not delivered? I mean, the A9 at the Sunday Mail, I did quite a kind of in-depth series of articles about obviously the issues with A9. I'm sure we've all written stories about the sort of dangers. And, you know, I think one of the things that struck me was I spoke to quite a few families whose relatives have sadly died on those roads, and just the sheer devastation that it causes to families for generations. It's not, you know, it's just really not good enough actually to do nothing about it.
I thought the A9 announcement was just an insult. I mean, you know, no detail backing it up, and we just expect to be grateful for this reheat of something that we don't actually think is going to happen. Another one, Hannah, childcare. Now, obviously, we've got the 3 hours just now for 3 and 4 year olds. Humza, during the leadership contest, said he wanted to extend it to 1 and 2 year olds. He's talking about a phased introduction for 2 year olds, not saying who's going to get it first. And when I asked him yesterday at the huddle, he couldn't give a guarantee that every 2 year old would have free childcare by 2026. So again, it's like, well, it just seems like words. It's like word soup. There's just nothing, no dates, no cash to back it up. And I mean, it feels like people's hopes are being raised and then they're inevitably going to be dashed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I said, you know, at the beginning of this podcast that I feel like there was a lot of promises, either old promises or some new promises, but then the detail is sorely lacking. And I think that that's where the issue is. And unfortunately, you know, it's not the first time we've heard this sort of criticism about Humza Yousaf. He's very charismatic. He's very personable. I think, people do like him as a person, but I'm hearing, when I'm speaking to people from across the, not necessarily political spectrum, but across sort of a range of industries, there's a lot of talk that Humza is really all talk, and they've had enough of that already from this government, and they want to see actual action that is going to benefit people living in Scotland. It's not good enough anymore just to say, as you're saying about childcare, for example, when you're actually questioning, well, how is this going to work and when are you going to be doing it? And there's no answer. People are not thick, and they know that if you can't give an answer, then it probably means because you don't know. So should that be in the programme for government? I would say probably not.
It sort of reeked of, let's just put it in. Let's just put it in there. Ben, do you not think, you look at the programme for government and then you consider that there's going to have to be £1 billion of cuts in the budget. I mean, this year for Humza, it's going to be about taking things away from people, not giving things away, not giving things to people. And politically, that is just going to be very, very difficult for him.
It's going to be, I think it'll be easier than you might think at first, because the SNP have developed a strategy for these cuts. And that strategy is cut the council budget and make them take things away from people. And all the bad news then gets handed on to local authorities, and the SNP can continue with this fantasy of good governance that they've managed to that's falling apart now. But for years they did manage to fool a majority of people in Scotland, enough people in Scotland, that they were doing a good job. Despite the fact, it's a long time now that councils have said, look, we are bearing the brunt of this. We're being cut to the bone, and local services are suffering. The same again. It'll be more of the same. The bulk of this £1 billion will be taken from local authority budgets. There'll be some clever accounting to kick another large chunk of it down the road, and the rest of it will be filled through tax rises. The councils have been told to increase council tax again by up to 22.5%, which they did already in 2017. Sorry to keep going back to taxes, but
no, it's okay.
If the Express editor's on the call, this is what our readers care about. This is the number one issue. They do not want any more tax rises.
Have you got the train booked to Cumbria yet?
Oh, don't tempt me, Paul.
I do think, though, it does. I think I have a real issue with this whole the way that the government sort of are so quick to blame local authorities. The number of times you go to the government for comment on a sort of, large issue, and they just blame individual local authorities. And as you say, they've been crying out for fair funding for, the whole time I've been a journalist anyway. I can't count the number of stories I've written about it. So, yeah.
Yeah, you see promises for big rises in the NHS, and then there's going to be extra spending on benefits. That local government are going to have to feel the pinch of that, because you can't possibly increase spending in all three, because that's just such a big bit of their budget. Let's just move on to another issue, the licensing scheme for short-term lets, which was passed by the Parliament.
January 22.
That's right, yes. And so there's a bit of a stooshy this week. In terms of the implementation of it, it's not going well, and there was a demonstration outside of Holyrood by some of the short-term let owners, who I think some of them want it scrapped, some of them want extra time in order to apply and cope with it. But there was one short-term let owner who said the following, and I just want to ask you about this, Hannah. The word pogrom means to destroy, to wreak havoc upon, and to violently demolish. It's often associated with the Nazis and their treatment of the Jews. But if you look at the actual definition of the word, that's what they're doing to this sector. They are the Parliament of pogroms. That is how I feel. What do you make of that?
A load of shite, basically. I just think, like, I'm sorry, but that kind of incendiary language is unacceptable in this context. You know, the issue, I understand, right, the issue that some of these people have. I think some of them just don't want to have to pay a little bit more to register for something. And there is the argument that, you know, if you're running like a B&B, for example, you already have to comply with a lot of these sort of rules and regulations anyway. So I think they feel like it's almost like you're paying twice for something. But, you know, if I was speaking to someone the other day and they made a very good point. So I'm just going to steal that point because I liked it. They said, you know, if I was running this campaign, I would have, you know, 70-year-old granny from Aberdeen who rents out her, you know, second house or something, and as a B&B, I wouldn't have all these sort of well-to-do, like middle-class people kind of throwing words like pogrom and things. It just doesn't, the public do not feel sympathy for these people. And I think it's a shame because there are genuine situations and business owners who will that really, really struggle with this. But people like that woman using this inflammatory language, you know, people just look at that and go, oh, shut up. Like, what are you talking about? You know, I don't want to listen to what you have to say. And that's a shame because I'm sure she would have some, you know, valid things to say, but that was not one of them.
Ben, these comments were idiotic, weren't they? Idiotic and offensive.
Do you know, I must admit, I hadn't actually seen the banner. I know it was reported. I think whoever was organising the protest should have really had a quiet word in her shell-like and said, "Well, you can't really. This is going to do us more harm than good." It's not the best comparison to make. Obviously, feelings are running very high. People are understandably upset and feel that their livelihoods are at risk. But at the same time, probably, you know, you've got to sometimes moderate the language that you use. I thought there was an excellent story in the Daily Mail, if I may praise our great rival today, about how in the Highlands and Islands and the more sort of rural areas, people are just really struggling to get the tradespeople in who are needed to bring these properties up to scratch to get a license. Apparently there's only 3 gas-safe engineers on the whole of Skye, and Skye's, you know, this tourist hotspot with lots of short-term lets, and these 3 guys are running around trying to make every single let comply with the new license, and they're just not able to do it. And someone said it's a very Edinburgh-centric piece of legislation because the main issues are in Edinburgh, where there's a shortage of accommodation because a lot of the flats in the city centre are being let now to tourists, and there's also the issue of rowdy behaviour by stag and hen parties and other visitors. So perhaps this should have been introduced in Edinburgh first and then rolled out across the rest of the country. I don't know. I think the problem is they're so far down the line now, another delay will just be seen as a U-turn.
Yeah. Andy Whiteman, the former Green MSP, wrote a decent blog on this. He's one of the experts on that, I would say, where he felt like bed and breakfast owners should be exempt, but they should push ahead with people who own commercial short-term lets. He's got no sympathy for the Airbnb owners in Edinburgh, given that the impact it's had on the affordable housing crisis. So, I mean, who knows? The government might go for some sort of delay, some sort of flexibility, but
they can't delay again. I mean,
no, but they might go for exemptions or
Well, have you seen the list of exemptions? It's like, it's ridiculous. You've already got screeds of
I'm
exemptions.
certainly not arguing for a delay or exemption. And
No.
I think that the people the women I quoted, people like that really do damage that particular cause, because I just think when you're making political points, just keep the Nazis out of it, keep the Holocaust out of it. It's just you automatically lose the point.
Yeah.
You lose the argument. And I think that the campaign, whatever they're arguing for, if it's a delay or greater exemptions, I think that it's probably moved backwards for them this week.
I agree.
So let's just move on to the spicy by-election in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. This two-horse race between Labour's Michael Shanks and the SNP's Katie Loudon. I mean, I say it's a two-horse race, Hannah, but Labour are going to win it, aren't they?
Yeah, it's just a one-horse race, in my opinion, to be honest. There's only one horse in it. I think that the SNP are doing a really good job in terms of their campaigning. They've definitely been out and about. They've been very, very busy. But I think that, given what has been happening recently with the SNP, we saw them lose the by-election in Bells Hill quite spectacularly. That was to Labour. And then, of course, we have to remember that the person who, the reason why we're having this by-election in Rutherglen and Hamilton West is because one of the SNP MPs, Margaret Ferrier, decided to go traipsing around the country essentially with COVID. Now, I suppose the treatment of Margaret Ferrier can be debated. I think there are people now who would suggest that she was maybe unfairly hung out to dry, given, the behaviour of the Tories and other people during lockdown. But, ultimately it was an SNP MP who held the seat and messed it up in some way. So that is always going to count against the SNP if they're trying to reclaim the seat. But yeah, I think Michael Shanks has done like a good job as well, kind of matching the SNP's energy in terms of campaigning. There's not been too many clangers or anything like that. Yeah, I see that there was the Green candidate was trying to kind of noise him up the other day about LGBT education in schools, but it doesn't really seem to have made much of a difference.
What about your piece at the weekend, Hannah, about a certain other candidate?
Yes.
Don't dwell on him too much, but, give us the greatest hits.
To be honest, I'd actually rather not. I think I've given him enough airtime, but basically...
an unpleasant man, basically.
I would say, I mean, I don't know him personally, but the kind of anyone who's willing to shout and scream at and swear at Humza Yousaf in front of an entire auditorium and also brick up a sexual health clinic, I think, it's not really...
Not
somebody I would want to be
in the House of Commons. Yes, definitely.
No, I wouldn't want this person to be my MP. Let's put it like that. But I think on a serious note, there's always a debate around whether you highlight these types of individuals or not. And I think there is a balance to be struck because they are seeking ultimately publicity in any form. But I also believe that it's quite important to inform the public of exactly who is, standing for election. So, yeah.
And Ben, just linked to the by-election, there was an interesting opinion poll yesterday which showed Labour and the SNP pretty much even Stevens for Westminster, which I think would give Labour more seats than the SNP. Do you feel like we've sort of reached the turning point here that Labour are actually going to win if the general election is next year in Scotland?
It certainly looks that way. There's, the polls have been heading in this direction for some time. I guess there's still a ways to go until the general election. The by-election will be interesting. I think Hannah's right. I think it's Labour's to lose. I mean, personally, I can't wait to see what the results are at the ballot box, because it feels like we've been talking about the SNP's kind of fall and Labour's rise for a long time now, but it's never actually been put to the test.
Yeah.
Well, unless you count Bellshill.
It's true. Council elections. I mean, some council elections, the Tories have done very well. I think earlier in the summer, Bridge of Allen was one, and there was some in the northeast as well.
Yeah.
So I think council elections, though, the turnout's so low.
I don't know. I mean, is the turnout for Westminster elections any higher for by-elections?
I think it's kind of slightly higher. It gets.
Yeah, it's more high profile, I suppose.
And it's more high profile. I just think that the by-election will be just such an interesting. We've had a lot of by-elections down south, and there's more coming. And this is really the first big test in Scotland for quite a long time, where we can actually get some concrete evidence to say either, A, calm down everyone, it looks like it's business as usual and people are still going to turn out and vote SNP because, I don't know, maybe they've just not been following the news closely enough. Or
I think it's the size of the Labour victory that is the most important thing here, rather than Labour victory, because we all think that that's going to happen.
Yeah, it's the swing, isn't it? And that we can then use to kind of predict the general election with a bit more certainty.
Right, let's just wrap this up, Ben. Good week, bad week, starting with you.
Good week. King Charles, he's in Scotland, obviously, at the moment. He was at the Braemar gathering last Saturday. I think there's events tomorrow. I don't know if I think I'm allowed to say this. I think he's planning something on TV to mark the first anniversary of his mother's passing. And there was also a poll this week which suggested that support for them retaining the monarchy is at 62% in the UK, which is about where it was for much of the past decade. So he's kind of confounded his critics who said, well, as soon as Queen Elizabeth goes, the affection that she was held in will disappear and the monarchy will start to crumble. Looks like to me that Charles has had quite a good first year on the throne, and long may it continue. Bad week. Again, away from Holyrood, I'm afraid, but she has had quite a bad week. Gillian Keegan, the UK Education Secretary. For me, I think the decision to close schools in England was probably a bit hasty. And I'm going to say that the Scottish government have maybe handled this a bit more delicately. This concrete's been there a long, long time. Is it in danger of imminent collapse in the next few weeks, or can it be repaired, urgently, but without disrupting children's education? I think it probably can. And then she's kind of gone from bad to worse. She's been the politician's worst nightmare. She's been caught on a off-camera microphone making some ill-advised comments. The papers seem to be going for her now. So I think she's had a bit of a bad week. Takes something to make Shirley-Ann Somerville look like a good cabinet secretary. But there you go.
Hannah, over to you.
So my good week is for police officers in Scotland. So Sunday Mail readers will have seen that we reported they were due to hold a protest outside Holyrood yesterday. And that would have been the first time in history, I think, that this has happened. So they were protesting or planning to about pay. And they managed to secure a pay deal. It wasn't quite as much as they wanted. They were asking for 8% and they got 7%. But I think, it's well deserved, really, given the sort of stresses and strains that the police are under on a daily basis. And obviously the Scottish government can continue their boasting about not having any strikes in Scotland. So I suppose it's a win-win for everyone, really, there. And my bad week is Joanna Cherry. And that is because, yet again, she has not been selected for a role in the SNP Westminster reshuffle. So it was a couple of years ago that she lost her front bench role under Ian Blackford, and she kind of kicked up quite a big stink about that at the time, as Joanna Cherry likes to do. But she's been kept off the front bench this time as well, and we've seen, I don't know, I would have actually liked to talk about that a bit more, the SNP reshuffle, but I guess it's only just weirdos like me who are interested in it, so and that is it.
Joanna Cherry, I know you two are close, so I mean, it's obviously it comes from a place
besties.
She wasn't in the reshuffled team. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. Ben, I know that you're going to do some house hunting in Cumbria, so I won't detain you any longer. I hope everyone has enjoyed listening to this Planet Holyrood, and please tune in next week as well.
It's important we look at the facts. Why?
Douglas Ross is sounding pretty scared.
I believe in independence. And he clapped like a seal.